Brian Burke from our hockey offices down at the CBC has been kind enough to jump in the chair, get some quick makeup, and do us a solid. Burkie, a lot of people want to hear your take on this. Were you surprised it happened now?
Well, I wasn't sure if it was going to happen now, today or tomorrow, the next day. But clearly there were sharks circling on this case, and I'm not totally surprised. But my first thing would be, this is a sad day for Mike Babcock and his family. So everyone's going to cheer and yell. And I remember when I got fired, it's so public, it's so humiliating. So I feel for Mike. It's the first time he's ever been fired in a long and great career. But I do think it was time for a change. If not now, then when they came back off this road trip, they clearly have the guy they wanted to coach all along, and that's Sheldon KEEFE.
We had talked about KEEFE and his history with Kyle Dubas. But as a guy who sat in the chair as a GM and a club president, what goes through your mind before you make an in-season firing? And we were just talking from Michael's tweet. Is there a worry about relieving some of the accountability on the players when you fire a head coach in the middle of a season?
Yes, that's a big question here, and the players deserve a great deal of heat for this, the way they've played. Especially the game that sickened me was the way they hung the young goaltender out to dry 2 nights ago.
Yeah.
I thought that was just unforgivable. They have not done their job. They have not worked as hard as they can. They deserve a great deal of blame. I'm madder at the players today than I am at anyone else. But you look at the start of the season, and you had a real bad schedule. You had a new 6 guys, new guys on the roster, so a big roster churn. Schedule difficulties, injuries to Tavares and Marner. So they didn't have Zach Hyman the first part of the season. So this was really destined almost to be a difficult start for Mike Babcock. You look at the organizational reasons that lead to the firing, because it is an organizational failure when you fire a coach. It's not just the coach's failure. The players failed, the management failed. So let's look at some of these factors. First off, they're in an impossible salary cap position, which was self-inflicted. They did not need to be where they are salary cap-wise. They overpaid a bunch of guys. I'd say the wage gap is between $3 and $5 million of what they paid players that they shouldn't have. That $5 million would go a long way toward the defenseman right now, which is what they need. So that's number one. Number two, the roster churn in the offseason, you bring in 5 or 6 new guys, that's problematic coming out of the gate. Next problem for me is the roster construction issue, which is I don't think they have a big enough team. I don't think they have a tough enough team. This is not a new lament on my part. And last, the backup goaltender debacle, that's management. That's not the coach. They don't have 1 point from a backup goaltender, and that means you're going to miss the playoffs.
Do you think we're done with the changes here, specifically now looking obviously at the roster, Burkie? Now it's tight, and you got to make a perfect deal, money in, money out. We all understand that. Do you think the changes are ending here, though?
I think that Kyle would like to make a change or two and put some accountability on the players, but I think in their salary cap situation, it's going to be very difficult for him to do that. And now the emphasis shifts to Kyle, obviously. You get to make one coaching change as a GM. You often don't get to make a second one.
Brian, it's interesting as we talk about the roster construction, all I can think of is this is what Kyle Dubas wanted, isn't it? Like, this is what he believes can win in the NHL right now, and that's why you would end up paying those guys what you paid them. 4 guys, $40 million of your salary cap. Isn't this the roster that he wanted to play with and thought he could win with?
Well, I think this is his vision, this type of team. And I think Mike Babcock shares that vision because he was a Greenpeace guy in Detroit, too. And I think Shanny shares that vision, and he was a hard-nosed player. And I've had this conversation with him. I said, can you, Brendan Shanahan, watch this team play the way you played? So I think it is Kyle's vision, but that doesn't mean you had to give Nylander what you gave him, $7 million for your 6th best player. And then that overpayment continued with Austin Matthews, and then it continued with Mitch Marner. So you're talking about somewhere between $3 and $5 million that was spent. You could have this same dream roster that Kyle wants, but you could have it at $5 million less and spend that money on a defenseman. So when you've got 4 guys making $40 million, and not one of them is a goaltender, and not one of them is a defenseman, you're in trouble. You're in deep trouble. And again, this is not piling on. I pointed this out at the time. I said, you've got to get Nylander at a good number. You got to kick his ass till his nose bleeds, and then you got to fight those other 2 guys. And instead, they just rolled over, paid them all the money they wanted, and now they've got a problem.
So if you're Sheldon KEEFE in that first meeting with Nylander and with Austin Matthews, just to pick 2 guys, I know it's a team game, but let's just pick those 2 guys. What do you say to them?
I think the first thing is he's got to get accountability in the room. Now let's talk about Sheldon Keefe. Sheldon Keefe is a good coach. His record in junior hockey is staggering, unbelievable, and continued in the American League. Now, detractors will point out that the Marlies won a Calder Cup, but they invested a ton of dough to do it. And they've got a ton of dough there this year, too. They're off to a good start. So you bring up the goaltender, you throw him in, he's 6-1-1, but he's playing behind a stacked roster. I think they've got 6 one-ways and 2 or 3 big two-ways down there. So they've overpaid at the minor league level to have success. So that's the asterisk besides Sheldon Keefe's numbers in the American League. He's got great numbers, but I think he's a good coach. He's in a tough spot. You have a rookie GM here, never been a GM before in a Canadian market, the biggest one. That's hard. A rookie coach who's never coached in the NHL, that's hard too. But this guy deserves a chance. He's a good coach and he's a good guy, and I'm going to give him a chance here. I think it's as tough a circumstance as you can possibly inherit, but I'm going to give this guy a chance.
The numbers with the Sioux and the numbers of the Marlies, all remarkably impressive from Sheldon Keefe, the 39-year-old who takes over. What do you hope as a general manager and or Brendan Shanahan, the president of the team, the players get when you make a shakeup like this?
Well, you'll see the players, they'll respond predictably. They'll say it's on us. A lot of the blame falls on us. They'll say all the right things, but they've got to start taking some accountability for how this team plays. And getting outworked is never acceptable, and they're getting outworked right now. That's not acceptable. And the coach's job, as I've said many times, is to prepare the team for their opponent. It's not to get them ready to play. That's their job, especially guys making the kind of dough these guys make. You can't get up for a game. You're getting $11 million a year, $7 million a year, and you need a coach to kick your ass to get you up for a game. They've got to take some accountability here, and they've got to say right away, we've got to get back to outworking our opponent. That's rule number one. Then what you do when you're slumping, it's like a baseball player. When he's slumping, they tell him, just hit the ball back through the pitcher's mound, or over the pitcher's mound. Just hit it straight away. Don't worry about placement. Same thing when you're struggling. You want to get the game simple. You want to throw the puck into the swamp in front of the net. You want it to go in off ankles and butts and get some ugly goals, win some games 2-1. They're not constructed to play that kind of game. So they're going to have to play a skill game, outwork their opponent, get back to what worked for them early in the season when they had a good start, and get back on track here, or they can kiss the playoffs goodbye. And with this roster, for this team to miss the playoffs would be a disaster.
Yeah.
So that's success at this point, Burke. I was going to ask you, how do you define success from this point on this year? Is a wild card a good year, considering how iffy things look math-wise?
Yes, I would say any kind of playoff finish and just getting in any position would be a success, considering where they are now and considering that they're in free fall right now.
When you look at how this team has played, Burke, and again, I'm not dancing on anyone's grave here, but who on that roster do you think will benefit the most from a change in style specifically? When you watch them play, who do you see as just suffocated by the system and you think could potentially benefit from something new?
Well, I think what you'll see is more improvisation and more experimentation. Like Mike is set in his ways and didn't like to change line combinations in game. Very basic elementary stuff for a first-year American League coach would know. If it's not working, change the lines, juggle some people, reward people with ice time, bench people who aren't performing. And Mike was reluctant to do that. I think you'll see more innovation and more experimentation from Sheldon Keefe right out of the gate. If a guy's not working, he's not going to get ice time with this coach. This guy has a whip and a chair right now.
Right. I know he got $50 million, and he's been paid the vast majority of that $50 million up front. I think this is a key in this. But do you see Mike Babcock walking quietly into the night, or do you see him wanting to be a head coach again in the National Hockey League?
Well, I think coaches always want to coach. I can't see Mike walking away from it. He's had a Hall of Fame caliber career. He is a good coach. He is a good person. And that all gets lost. When you get fired, it's so public. Yeah. And I feel for him and his family today because I've been there, and it's a really tough day. And I'm sure he didn't see it coming. They said he was relaxed at practice and so on. So if Mike Babcock wants to coach again, he will coach again. He's a good coach.
Would you consider his time in Toronto a success?
Well, the team got better every year he was here until this year. They made the playoffs. You know, they had a bad first year, but they've been building steadily. And now they hit not a speed bump. They hit a chasm here. And so I would say overall, he didn't win any playoff rounds, nor did I. I'm not throwing a rock. But I would say people will look back on this and say it was unsuccessful, but he did a lot of good things too.
Burke, you got a busy night at Scotiabank Wednesday Night Hockey, but you were kind enough to jump on. We appreciate it, man. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right, there.